Welcome back to Facilitation Fridays. I'm really excited to talk about some redirection techniques. In this lesson, I am Kalani, your host and teacher at World Drum Club. So what do we do when we want to break up some monotony, or we want to break up a perceivable actions? You know, when people get stuck. Sometimes people are playing music, or they're practicing, they're exploring, they're improvising, but they don't feel like they're doing anything productive. You know, they're kind of stuck in a rut. They're rut stuck. And what do we do? Well, there's some techniques from music therapy techniques that we use, and I outline in The Way of Music book. And these are starting on page 111. These are all music-based techniques, right? That's kind of what the point of music facilitation is, to use the music to change, to grow, to differentiate, to modulate, all these things. So these are some exciting techniques because these are not like obtrusive. They're not invasive, like conducting or commanding people to stop or to do things, to pay attention to you. These are ways that you can change the music you're playing. And again, these can apply to having a conversation with somebody. They don't have to be music-based. In this case, they are, but these are covert, all right, which I think is very exciting because when I'm facilitating a group music-making experience, I want people to feel like it's their experience, like they're the ones that are driving it, they're the ones that are owning it, right? They're the ones that are the creators, and I'm there as a supporter, coach, guide, facilitator. So these are exciting. These are redirection techniques. There are several. I'm going to talk about a few of them, and then maybe we'll go to Patreon and discuss them a little bit further because there's a few, and I don't want this to be a super long lesson. So really quick, one of the basic techniques that we use is called introducing change, all right? And I'm not talking about pocket money. I'm talking about introducing a new element. So it's very simple. These are not complex things, but they're things that you want to remember you can do, and each of these will have an effect, right? So let's say people are playing the music, they're playing along, and it just kind of feels like there's nothing new happening. They're getting bored, or they're just running out of ideas, or whatever. So if you can add or change an element, you just want to introduce something different. So that might look like playing a different instrument, putting down what you're doing and playing something else, or changing your own modality, like going from playing to not playing, going from playing to moving, or going from playing, changing your instrument up to vocalizing, for example. You're not stopping the music. Introducing change is just a way to change something in the music, one of the musical elements. Could be any number of things, but that's the basic idea. So just when you change something, what's going to happen is people will say, oh, what was that? Something happened. So if you change, chances are, and we can't predict outcomes, but we can guess, that something might happen. But if you change the way you're playing, if you change your music, probably other people will change theirs. And then that will lead to new things. And there'll also be a domino or cascading effect. The more people who change, the more people who change. Okay, another one that's related to this, and these are all techniques, right? These are all things we do in the moment, is called modulating. And modulating is an established musical term. However, we're using it a little bit differently than the traditional application. So in a traditional sense, when we say the music modulated, we're usually, not always, but usually talking about tonality. And more specifically, key or tonal centers. So we'd say the music modulated up a half step, or up a whole step, or it modulated to the relative minor. These are all very common, especially if you are a fan of Barry Manilow and you listen to Barry Manilow songs. You might notice that Barry Manilow songs have a tendency to modulate the key. The key elevates, the tonality starts to raise maybe 2 or 3 times during the song. This is a way to breathe some new life into the song, add a little bit of excitement. But in this case, in this definition, as it's used in music therapy and as you can use it in your work, modulating means changing a fundamental element of the music, but not changing anything else. So it's kind of like introducing change, but it's maybe a little more specific in that you're changing something fundamental. So I'll give you an example. You might change, let's say you change the meter. Let's say we're playing and you introduce a triplet meter or a triplet-based meter like 12/8. You introduce that when people are in 4/4. So we've been moving along, and you and nothing else changes, just that feel. That would be a modulation. You can introduce rhythmic complexity. And the key to modulation is that it's not a temporary change and then it goes back to what it was. It's a permanent change. So you would commit to that change and you would keep that change and then go with it moving forward. And again, it has a similar effect to introducing change, but it's a little more about the fundamentals of the music. So it could be tonal modulating, could be, you know, moving to a new key center, but if you're doing something like group drumming, it could be changing the meter or changing the fundamental feel of the music, different things like that. Maybe going to a halftime feel or a double time feel. All right. The next one is called interrupting. And you guys all know the knock knock joke, right? The interrupting cow. It's kind of like that. No, interrupting would basically be a little bit more of a strong action. And this generally would work more with a one-on-one client. So let's say the client is playing something and they're just playing the same thing over and over and over, perseverating, and they're stuck. And we might just kind of introduce something that is way different and a little more angular to what they're doing in an effort to actually break apart and break up what they're doing. So it's sort of like if somebody was talking and they were sort of saying the same thing over and over, telling the same story, you know, and kind of going around in circles, then you might introduce, you might start talking and say, okay, well, let's talk about this, or let's get back to this point, right? And you're sort of interrupting their flow with the hopes of, again, breaking that apart, getting them out of their rut, and really changing things up. So that's called interrupting. That is where you're literally coming in at an angle, right, to what somebody's doing. You're interrupting their music with something else. And again, that's a little more heavy-handed than some of these other ones. But it can still work to, you know, redirect, change things up. Another technique that we use a lot is called intensifying or intensification. You would know this just as examples of playing louder, maybe playing faster. It's basically adding energy. So whatever adds energy, and it could be just the way you're playing. It doesn't have to be something very obvious like dynamics, although it could be. It could be the timbre or the sound of the instrument, you know, just more intense. So anything that adds energy to the music is intensification. And again, when that changes, when the intensity of the music changes, people tend to react. They have, you know, it breaks apart the cycles of repetition and monotony. Conversely, another technique is called calming. And calming is the opposite of intensification, right? Calming is removing energy. It's not conducting. We're not going to do this. You know, we're not directing. It's you playing in a way that just, you know, maybe it slows down, maybe it gets softer, quieter. And the way we do these is, you know, we just do them. And because people are listening and because music is an interactive, you know, art form, when one person starts playing more calmly, chances are other people will play more calmly. And I want to be clear that these are all experimental. These are not prescriptive. Don't write, oh, Kalani, I tried calming and it didn't work. Okay, if you think that these are going to have a predictable outcome, then you're missing the point and you don't understand the dynamics. These are things that you try. It's a technique. It's not meant to guarantee an outcome. It's a technique that you try and then you see what happens. And then from there, you would reevaluate, you'd assess, and then you try something else or you try it again. All right, so it's not the technique that either works or doesn't work. It's a technique that you can use, and then you have to see what happens. So that's calming. Calming could be tempo, dynamics, or maybe the way you're playing. And finally, in this short discussion of these techniques, we're going to look at one more, and that is called contrasting. And of course, it's self-explanatory, right? Contrasting would be playing music that is very different than the music of someone else, or very different than the group. Now, this kind of relates to maybe introducing change, right? Or maybe it even relates to interrupting. It's sort of the opposite of what I've talked about in past Facilitation Friday videos, which was the idea of synchronizing or matching. So contrasting is, you create a very different feel, you create very different music than the music that other people are creating, with the idea that it will help them maybe open a new pathway. It'll shine some light on some other possibilities. It's kind of relating to modeling as well. When we do modeling, we're doing something that we might, that it's kind of a suggestion like, hey, you could do this. Look what I'm doing, maybe you want to do it. Okay, so that's contrasting. Now, in the book, of course, I go into more detail. I also talk about what these, what the implications for these are, not just musically, but interpersonally. And that's where it also relates to things outside of the music. So again, these are not only for musicians, and they don't only apply to musical situations. They can also apply to group discussions, all right? Workplace, business, family. So just keep that in mind. So that's a lot. So let's review. We have introducing change. We have modulation, right? Changing something fundamental and sticking with it. We have interrupting, and that is directly interrupting. That's not filling in a hole that's left open like we talked about before. This is like boop, coming in at an angle with something very different. We have intensification, adding energy, calming, reducing energy, and then contrasting. Okay, do some of these sound familiar? If you have questions for me or comments, you have a helpful comment, leave it below. If you would like to dig into these a little bit more, you can meet me over at patreon.com/Kalani. We can talk about this book if you have it. I highly recommend you get it if you're facilitating any kind of music, if you're a music educator. Certainly a lot of music therapists get this book, but even if you're doing community music making, there's lots of great stuff in here. And if you like my shirt, get it by clicking the link below. All right, this has been another episode of Facilitation Friday. I'm Kalani. Thanks for watching.